No, they are not worth it. No wait, I mean stick around to the end of this video to find out whether or not the new mods are worth buying. Bethesda recently released an update combining the Creation Club page with the general mods page, and as you can imagine, it broke quite a lot of stuff. But for those asking, I tested my old mod packs and they do still work. I've just noticed a lot of issues with crashes happening when trying to download mods now, and generally larger mods seem to take longer to install than they used to. I don't know if this is likely to get resolved soon based on the history of these sort of problems, so we may be stuck with these bugs for a while. But don't worry, with the new update came a collection of premium paid mods. That may seem irrelevant, but last time an update broke the mod screen for Skyrim, all you had to do to fix it was to give money to the Bethesda code gods by buying the Anniversary Edition, and instantly all your problems would be resolved. So that got me thinking. Maybe if I buy the paid mods, then the mod page will just suddenly work again like normal. With my foolproof plan in place, I set out to try and determine exactly how many V-Bucks I was going to need to get all of the mods. The paid mods could easily be found in the new Verified Creators section, although it's called that despite not featuring the free mods of many verified creators. Almost like this is actually just the paid section. They just didn't want to actually use the words. I can't imagine why. As anyone who's tried to use any store system like this will know, there are a series of barriers to try and make it as difficult as possible for you to connect the thing you're buying with how much you're actually paying for it. What they want to do is to try and reduce the extent to which you're thinking in terms of money. Because if they just had prices, then no one would look at a $5 for a single armor set and think, wow, that's a good deal. Because I knew this system was designed to make it more difficult and complicated to just buy what it is you wanted and nothing more, I genuinely sat down and carefully added up the cost of the mods I was getting to make sure that I wouldn't end up needing to buy more credits afterwards. So these mods in total cost me £31, which is about $40, and that's almost 1 million Vietnamese dong. This is getting out of hand. After making my purchase, I sat down and downloaded them. Something that I discovered right away is that unlike Creation Club, these mods do use up your mod space, meaning that they already don't have the main benefit Creation Club had for console players. The thing is, as much as Creation Club was a rip-off prior to the Anniversary Bundle, it at least had something to set it apart from free mods. Also, I hate that we've gotten to the point where I'm using Creation Club as a benchmark of quality. But without features like this, the only thing that can possibly make these premium mods worth it is the content within them. So let's see exactly how the mods themselves hold up. I feel like it's a good idea to start with the most positive experience I got from these mods, that being the gun mod, Arquebus. Arquebus centres around adding a new weapon type to the game, a Dwarven gun, which on its own sounds kind of boring, but the reason I'm talking more positively about this mod is because it also adds in a dungeon and quest related to acquiring the various versions of the weapon. The quest can be triggered by finding a book in the wild, similar to the Ethereum Forge quest from Dawnguard, or you can just wander over to the Dwarven ruins whenever you want and start the quest from there. The dungeon is the main thing that makes me like this one. It's a decent size and has some great visuals, and some really unique and well-designed encounters. As soon as you enter the dungeon, you are immediately shown the atmosphere that is going to be present for the entire first half. The ruin is crumbling, large parts of it are flooded, and even more water is flowing in. I did get caught out by a standard Dwarven pressure plate trap here, because despite what you may think looking at my channel, this is actually my first time playing Skyrim. One thing I'm not the biggest fan of is the way this dungeon's offshoots and side rooms work. A lot of them are empty, which is normally fine, but they're also quite long, which 1 means you waste more time exploring empty areas, and 2 makes it harder to identify which route is the main one and which are side areas. So you find yourself having to backtrack quite a lot to make sure you haven't missed anything. There was also a room filled with static scrolls piled up, like the sort of thing you find in house mods. I guess it helps add to the visual atmosphere of the dungeon, but I can't help but feel like it's a bit annoying for there to be things that look just like loot, but in reality they're just decoration. It's like the dungeon is baiting us, but if I'm being honest, I find this a less annoying option than featuring hundreds of junk items in the game just to scatter around locations. Wouldn't it be dumb if there was a AAA studio that still did that sort of thing? Arriving at the Dwarven lift, we encounter a new enemy type, which is basically a variant on the Dwarven ballista, but instead using the new Arquebus pellets. It's pretty tough and quite cool to fight, and they do fit quite seamlessly. I would actually be really happy if they were scattered around some Dwemmer ruins throughout Skyrim, but they do appear to only be confined to this one dungeon. Taking the lift, you immediately notice something strange, as you find yourself actually standing on the moving lift, which of course isn't how this normally works. Sure enough, this is a unique combat encounter, where dwarven spiders drop from above and you have to hold out against them within an enclosed space until the lift eventually crashes. This is a really cool encounter, and kinda feels like the sort of dynamic fights you used to see in something like Halo. On my second playthrough, because I'm a terrible person, I moved the body that was left on the lift away from the area, and then activated it to discover it had teleported back. Wow, immersion broken, 3 out of 10. I also found a door that just wasn't. Like, it wasn't blocked by debris, it just wasn't a door. I thought maybe they had forgotten to add the door control, and couldn't help but wonder what I was missing. But yeah, there's nothing there. It's just a wall that looks like a door, I guess. Moving on, you will find the Arquebus gun lying on the floor, which functions like a sort of grenade launcher. It does high explosive damage, but has a slow reload. It's not crazy powerful at first, but the variants you get later on become much stronger. If you have good lockpicking, there is also an opportunity to get a hold of a Dwarven variant pretty early on. Anyway, with your gun in hand, you are then put into my favourite part of the dungeon. You have to work your way up a large dwarven room, activating some valves. You will be shot at by a lot of ballistas, and closing the distance is pretty tricky, promoting ranged combat, and it's really fun, using cover and dueling these enemies with whatever ranged gear you have. Arriving at the end, you are greeted by a small puzzle, using tuning forks. It's the exact same as the Fire and Ice one from, I think, the College of Winterhold questline, but they make it more interesting by throwing some enemies at you. The final boss of the dungeon is the Library Overseer, basically a modified Centurion. The encounter is specifically designed to give you a chance to position for using the Dwarven Ballistae, but despite this, I still managed to mess up all 4 chances I had to shoot the boss with them. Fortunately, it didn't matter, because for some reason, when I ran to kill it, it didn't attack me at all. It was just standing there. Menacingly! Your reward for finishing the dungeon are some schematics, allowing you to make the new weapon, a summoning staff for the new dwarven enemy, and a unique version of the Arquebus which does more damage and shoots steam when fired, the sound effect of which will cause a heart attack every time you use it. This is the only mod that, above all else, actually feels like a miniature DLC. It adds in multiple types of thing centered around a single theme. We have a dungeon, an enemy type, a weapon type, and a little quest with a complete story. It's definitely overpriced for the amount of content, but if all the paid mods were like this one, I think my entire video would have a very different tone. But unfortunately, they're not. Now I want to cover the 2 house mods available, starting with Winterfrost Plus Edition. The house is located on its own island that can be accessed by boat from Solitude Dock. Although the first time you go, you will need to travel through a smuggler's cave, following a trail of notes left by a mercenary. These notes are really poorly written, in such a way that I think I can only really explain it by just reading one of them to you. The fact you don't know what you're getting yourself into is amazing me, on how the fact you are so blind and you don't tell where you are going to, and the fact you have known other for how long? I'd say it looks like it was written by an AI, but AI are usually more coherent. Poorly worded letters like this are actually pretty common in modding, and are usually just the result of a language barrier. It isn't normally much of an issue, but this is a premium mod that Bethesda have verified is fine and is good enough to be charged for. You couldn't really ask for more explicit proof of the lack of quality control going on here. At least with Creation Club, the content being made was checked to make sure it worked and made sense. But now they can't even be bothered to run the mods through a spelling and grammar check. If these mods aren't getting any sort of checking like this, I'm really left wondering what Bethesda are doing to earn that 70% share of the mod price, and what exactly it is that makes these premium mods in any way better than the thousands of free mods already available. Anyway, following the trail of notes brings you to a smuggler's cave, protected by a deadly pack of hawkers. Venturing inside, you travel across a bridge over some lava and into the den of the smugglers, where you will find them all already dead. Looking around, you can find some of the funniest threatening notes I've ever read, and will be able to piece together what happened. The story here is quite simple. The group of smugglers living here had a falling out and ended up killing each other. What was the argument about? Well, they had different opinions on whether or not they should wear armour. Maybe this really was written by an AI. Also in the Smuggler's Den, you will find what is probably my favourite part of the entire mod. The smugglers have a bunch of counterfeit versions of some of the famous artifacts found around Skyrim. They have Ethereum stuff, Daedric artifacts, stuff like that. And they look exactly the same, but the stats are tanked, so they don't actually work. I just thought it was a really funny thing to include, although for some reason the Rueful Axe still gives you a speed boost. I think Clavicus has been here. Moving into the next area, you will find the final smuggler's body, having seemingly died to some sort of cold attacks, probably because he wasn't wearing any armour. Finally, we reach the boss of the mini-quest, a Wisp Mother. It's not the best requirement, you can still very easily get this house from level 1, but it's a significant step up from just leaving the key under a rock like so many house mods do. So with the prelude out of the way, let's take a look at the actual house. As I mentioned earlier, it is located on its own island and can be accessed via a boat from Solitude Docks. This is pretty cool and minimises the chances of it getting in the way of other mods, because it's off in its own little area. You can fast travel to the island with ease, but if you're playing without fast travel, say if you're using survival mode, you may find the house a bit impractical. You have to go through a loading screen to get to the island from Solitude Docks. Then you need to go through 3 more loading screens just to get from the boat into the actual house. The house itself has a small walled courtyard. There is a bunch of outside smithing equipment and some of the fancy separated storage you see in most house mods now. There is also a weird smelter that doesn't do anything. I think they just put it there by accident. I'm so glad I opted for the premium and polished house mod instead of the free ones that have mistakes all over the place. Then there's some dead chickens and a place to store some animals, but you can't assign a steward to the property, so I don't know exactly where these animals are going to come from. Looking inside, the first thing you notice is that it's super dark, so much so that they give you a candlelight spell off the bat, just in case. The reason for this is because you have to switch the lights on yourself. It's a cute little feature that I'm sure you will do at least once before never switching them off again, because why would you? It's a nice thing to add, but the way it's set just means that even with the lights on, you can't see all that great. This is, I think, supposed to be an extension of this house's main feature, customization. You can change the walls and the floors of one of the rooms. And throughout the house, there are a selection of decorations you can choose to remove or add. Things like rugs, paintings, and whatever these things are. Again, these are cool ideas, but in practice, they don't really impact your experience of using the house a whole lot. The actual house itself is quite nice. It doesn't feature companion or adoption support, but has a grand master bedroom, kitchen, fireplace, and an enchanting/alchemy section. It also features a full trophy room that you have to go through and build yourself, which is a nice little addition. This is also where the benefit of the counterfeit items come into play, because you can use them for display, allowing you to have all the unique items where you normally would only be able to have some. For example, you can showcase all 3 Ethereum Forge items, despite normally only being able to craft one of them. I just think it's really funny that these knockoff artifacts are genuinely my favourite part of this whole mod. I don't think that this is a bad house by any means, but it's definitely not worth paying for. The only thing that sets it apart from other houses amount to little more than gimmicks that really don't offer much value after you initially discover them. Anyway, it seems like the main things this house offers is a remote location and a full trophy room, so here are some free alternatives that cover those elements. Moving on to the other house mod, I'm going to be taking a look at Shadetree Lodge. I complained with Winterfrost that the house wasn't properly integrated into the game and was just available for free with a letter and a wisp mother acting as some sort of mini-quest. It's not great, but it's better than just leaving the key on the floor, as many house mods do. Shadetree, on the other hand, doesn't even have a key. The door is just unlocked when you arrive, which is disappointing. Leaving some sort of key or giving some sort of explanation as to why this house is up for grabs feels like the bare minimum, and they haven't even done that. There did happen to be some wolves in the area when I arrived, but they weren't much of a challenge considering I was getting a free house for defeating them. The house has full crafting facilities with smithing stuff outside, and some uniquely designed alchemy and enchanting stations inside. There's a kitchen and a bedroom and an armory behind a secret door, although it doesn't have a full trophy room inside. There's also a nice area that would be really great to store my house keys.
If I had one!
I've been kind of making fun of this one, and to be clear, it's not bad. It's a perfectly fine house. It's just that it's in no way better than the free alternatives already available. There's no extra level of detail to the house, it's not got any special design element or extra level of integration that makes it worth the price. The only reason you would want to buy this one is if you happen to prefer this variation of a house layout more than the other many variations available for free. So naturally it's easy for me to recommend a bunch of free alternatives to you. Here are a couple of my favourites, and there are of course plenty more available if you want something else. Next we have a quest/dungeon mod, which is probably a good sign going into it. Microtransactions like this that actually add in content, not just new gear or abilities, but actually add playtime, by giving you something new to do, usually are what lead to the few times where I feel like I'm getting my money's worth. The first dungeon I'm going to cover is Stone Garden, which is my favourite out of the two. The story has us tracking a group of alchemists who attempted to use some ancient Dwemmer tech to resurrect all of their dead alchemist friends. And they would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling robots. We first enter a large open area where a ton of incensed dwarven enemies can be found to fight. I did my first playthrough of this on what I would call a pretty typical level 25 character, and immediately realised that I was underpowered. So I would recommend being a bit higher, or maybe just have an actual good build instead of chucking on some unenchanted orcish gear and calling it a day. Anyway, because of this lack of preparation, I found myself having to spam healing potions a lot. But hey, this is Skyrim, sometimes that's just how the game is played. After clearing the main room, you have a couple of options for where to go next. This is a recurring issue, but I don't think they do the best job of signalling which path is the main one, and which will lead you down side rooms. I ventured into one of the side rooms where I had to fight a powerful mage defending a safe containing some general loot as well as some dwarven bone dust. And this is where the confusing navigation becomes a problem. There are 4 safes hidden in the side rooms throughout this dungeon, containing this bone dust. When you reach the end of the dungeon, you will need all 4 of them to open the door to the next area. Meaning, if you didn't clear every offshooting room, which as mentioned earlier are pretty tricky to identify, you're going to be forced to go all the way back over your own route to try and find where you went wrong. Anyway, after acquiring my first bone dust, I was killed for standing vaguely near some lava. I didn't even touch it! So after repeating the entire fight, I moved my way into the next room and came across some dwarven phantoms, which are basically people in dwarven armour. They're actually pretty cool, and come with a couple of variants that act as melee, ranged, and spellcasting versions of the enemy to mix up the encounters a bit. One thing I think worth commenting on is the atmosphere. This dungeon is pretty visually impressive. Every room is kind of different and weird, and there is this mist on the floor that makes everything look a bit more eerie. Moving on, there's a bit where a dwarven centurion smashes through a door in order to get to you. Well, he doesn't really smash through it, more smashes against it a couple of times, then the door opens. but it's still a pretty cool scripted moment for the dungeon. But then we move into a little multi-layered fight where I experienced some glitched Dwemmer spectres that didn't attack me until after I tried to talk to them. Must have been something I said. There's some more unique stuff down here, such as this weapon. Although, as I'm stood here holding this regular weapon with a regular enchantment, I feel like I should probably clarify that when I say unique, I'm being kind. They aren't really unique, they're just regular gear with modified names to suit the lore of the dungeon. And here I reached the Mad Alchemist himself. He uses ice magic and is your classic glass cannon mage boss, so the fight didn't last very long. Finally, at the end of the dungeon, you need to deposit the Dwarven Bone Dust, which you should have already found throughout the dungeon. Of course, for any skilled and experienced Skyrim player, this should prove to be no problem at all. So I went back to find the one I missed, and then I was ready for the final challenge. Through the door is a really cool, unique room, and the final boss, which is really 3 bosses that are actually just souped up Dwarven Centurions. It's a pretty tough fight, but the room's really big, and they constantly get in each other's way, so you can outmaneuver them really easily and chip away at their health while dodging their attacks as if it were Dark Souls. All in all, this was a pretty good dungeon. I enjoyed it. But the thing is, this mod actually contains 2 dungeons, so before talking about the quality of it as a whole, I need to first introduce you to Frostvault. Just like Stone Garden, this dungeon can be found within the first room of a vanilla dungeon, and upon entering you will be greeted by a set of Dwarven spectres. They were a bit more packed together than the other dungeon. Much more of the Dwarven enemies are thrown at you all at once. It occurred to me that I was not at the appropriate power level when I saw that the enemies were using glass weapons. Fortunately, I still had my handheld nuke from the Arquebus mod to make short work of any encounters that were proving to be too much effort. Throughout the dungeon, there are a fair few encounters that are pretty tough. Not in a tactical way where you have to strategize, more in a drink 6,000 health potions kind of way. Because for every Dwemmer you defeat, there's 5 more waiting around the corner to attack you. Reaching the end of the bridge, we have a large vault door, and you are given the task of venturing into the lower levels in order to reroute some junctions and open the door. And let me tell you, this section is an absolute nightmare to navigate. The paths cross over each other, there are tons of little tunnels that lead nowhere, and it has multiple floors, making quest markers pretty useless. It feels like the Falmer caves you go through before the Temple of Auriel mixed with Blackreach, and then made 10 times more frustrating. If you play as a stealth archer who likes to sneak around everywhere, you're going to be down here for months. As I traversed the maze of tunnels, I also came across a red valve, which it turns out wasn't the junction I was after. I activated it anyway, but it didn't do anything, which is a bit weird. Anyway, this area may be unpleasant to travel through, but at least it's great to look at. It feels like the length of one of those end-of-quest dungeons, like heading to Sovngarde or the Temple of Auriel. These are long dungeons which offer nothing in the way of respite, or opportunities to ditch loot. What they do instead is mix indoor and outdoor sections to try and break up the monotony, and make the experience feel less like a single endless slog. This dungeon tries similar things, but to less of an effect. One, because it only has a handful of enemy types scattered around, so you don't feel much diversity between the encounters. And 2, because the poor navigation means you're doing a lot of backtracking, making the extended runtime feel more frustrating than anything else. Anyway, once I found the valves, I had to go all the way back to the vault door, so I could go in and kill the boss, which was easy enough, before passing through the second vault door to get to the final section. Except there was a problem. Remember that valve I found? Well, it turns out that now I needed to go back and activate all of them. This means going back through the exact same labyrinth all over again, just this time activating a different set of MacGuffins. This really feels like they are trying to artificially inflate the playtime, but in doing so they've taken the worst part of the dungeon and made it twice as long, changing it from a pretty good dungeon with a couple of flaws into an experience that I mainly remember for its insufferably boring middle section. So anyway, after doing all that busy work, I finally opened the door to the vault, which had a really cool opening animation. Entering, I was greeted by the worst sight I could have possibly run into. and it was at this point I decided to stop playing this dungeon. I did eventually return a few days later, but I will say for anyone wondering why this video is coming out like 2 months after the paid mod's released, this dungeon is the main reason. The final 2 valves are relatively easy, and then you fight a phantom dragon, and at long last you get to leave. So to conclude, these 2 dungeons are fine. They are visually great and are integrated into the world really well. They are awkward to navigate and require a lot of backtracking, making the experience really not that fun. They're fine as mods go, but not premium by any sense. As for free alternatives, there are of course the heavyweights like Forgotten City or Bruma, but if you are looking for mods that add in just a couple of dungeons like this one, here are some options. Next we have the follower mod, Katja The Thief. It adds in a fully voiced Nord follower, who can be found being harassed by 2 guards in Whiterun. The first thing you will notice is that although the follower is fully voiced, the guards are not, and they will just constantly respond to you with a sort of aha sound. Basically, they're Minecraft villagers in disguise. If you select Persuade,
Yes.
if you select Intimidate,
Yes.
in the end I opted for the most reliable option, of course being good old Bribery. Except this time, it somehow proved unreliable. I got a strange bug where the following scene was interrupted, so I had to pay twice to get my follower. No wait, 3 times. Anyway, at long last I get to meet my new follower, Katja. At first I thought the accent wasn't very Nordic, to me it sounded more like Katja was from Liverpool. But I think this was just a couple of stray lines.
I told you I didn't take anything. You are going to pay for this. I will find you. I will bring a dagger to your bellies while you bleed to death.
Lister to Red Dwarf. Seems unable to grasp simple threats. With careful pummeling, could possibly be sucking tomorrow's lunch through a straw.
Katja is pretty standard as companions go. The main benefit she has is the ability to open any lock, although even then, she isn't the only companion that can do that. One thing that does set her apart from most other companions is that she does not count as your companion when following you, meaning you can have another ally alongside her. She even has some unique lines of dialogue that can trigger when she meets these other companions, as well as a handful of other characters. Being a thief, Katja is inclined to steal things, constantly, and with an alarming rate of detection. As we travelled through any major city, I would hear almost every NPC yell thief. I mean, if she's going to nick stuff, she could at least have the decency to not get caught. She is supposed to be this expert thief after all. The first time she stole something, I thought it was pretty funny, but honestly after that first one, it's just annoying. I was a bit worried that she might try to rob me, but then of course I remembered Bethesda have already done that. Also, it's really strange how no one actually does anything about it. The person being robbed yells out, but doesn't actually act, and the guards don't do anything either, not even lip service, like ordering her to return it or something.
Get your thieving hands off that.
Oh no! Anyway.
Yeah, after using this one for about an hour, I got sick of having Katja as a follower. She isn't very useful in combat, and when travelling through dungeons, I would constantly lose her, as her pathing seems to struggle to navigate certain terrain. In terms of her range of dialogue and interaction, she has no more to offer than most free alternatives, and in some cases, she has significantly less. It's definitely not worth paying for. So when it comes to free alternatives, I think the most obvious example is INIGO, which is just a more advanced mod in pretty much every way. Here are some options if that's not what you want. Now I'm going to cover an armor mod, which adds in a light armor set called the Aldmeri Anti-Mage. Have you ever dreamed of looking like you're a member of that antagonistic faction you can't join at any point in the game? Are the vanilla Thalmor gear options just not doing it for you? Well, look no further, because for the low price of 400 credits, you can buy a set of Thalmor light armor. I think the first thing that jumps out to me is the price. It costs 400 credits, or roughly a $5. To put that into perspective, it's 4 times the price of the Creation Club armor sets. And no, it doesn't even come with a little quest or variations to try and justify that price. It is just a single set of armor. I'm not saying it's a bad thing for there to be content that's just gear that's integrated into the game. I just don't see anything to justify it being more expensive than the older gear was, when the only difference between them on a technical level is that the new gear mod takes up some of your limited mod space. I think the armor looks fine. It's not really my sort of thing. I doubt I would have bought it had I not been making this video, but it does achieve its goal of being a variant Thalmor armor. And if you are playing a Thalmor character, you may even use it that one time. If not, then it will look kind of out of place for you to do so. Kind of like playing as a Dwemmer and running around with the Elf Slayer 6000. It's not that you have to stick to playing with gear that suits your character, it's just that the only difference between this gear and others with equivalent stats in the base game is that it suits a specific group of characters. So if you're not even going to take advantage of that, what's the point? You might as well just use the free gear. I do think it looks better without the hood, and could function a bit like general ornate mage gear, giving it a bit more utility. These comparisons also leave me wondering why it's called anti-mage armor. To me it looks more like anti-mage armor, or as some people would call it, mage armor. But that doesn't really matter, does it? What does matter is that the hood has no menu model. I've tested this on multiple vanilla characters, and yeah, nothing. It seems like a small thing, and it's actually pretty common in armor mods, but it just really compounds the fact that this mod is in no way of a higher standard than the free alternatives. Best case scenario, this mod is just a massive rip-off you'll use a couple of times. Worst case, it's a complete waste of money that you will never use. Now, as promised, some free alternatives. First of all, of course, there is the base game gear, and if you're looking for some ornate or elven-themed mage gear, here are a couple of good options you can try. The final mod I've got to talk about is also the most expensive, and it's called East Empire Expansion. Essentially what this mod does is adds in a service to transport loot from dungeons you have cleared, to either be collected by you at a later date, or sold on your behalf. It sounds pretty convenient as a sort of time saver, so I was excited to try it out. The first thing you need to do is complete any dungeon, and when you're done, you will be approached by a Khajiit named Sharkat. Sharkat will offer this service to you and explain how it works. You are given tokens that you can place inside chests that you want to be collected. Then you just need to dump all the loot you want collecting into that chest, and it will be picked up for you. It's a cool idea, and although it can be achieved through other mods, this is the most cleanly integrated option that I've seen. Having this stuff sold on your behalf bypasses what, in my opinion, is one of the most tedious elements of the game. Once you've done that first dungeon, you're shown to the camp where you can collect your gear, and you are then free to use the collection service in any dungeon within that hold. Then you can undertake a small quest to unlock other holds. Well, calling it a quest might be a bit much. It's more like a cutscene with extra steps. So this all sounds really positive so far, but what are the issues? Well, this mod is very dedicated to feeling like an authentic Bethesda experience, so it's only right that it's absolutely packed with bugs and glitches. My first attempt to use the service was unsuccessful because Sharkat got stuck in the dungeon and was unable to complete the delivery. I think his pathfinding might be a bit dodgy. So I restarted the save and made sure to select the option that didn't require the character to actually make the collection. This time he claimed to have made the delivery, but upon arriving at the camp, the chest was empty. I just can't help but find it disappointing that this is the most expensive mod here, and it's entirely centered around doing just one thing. And then despite all this, it still manages to repeatedly get it wrong. Then I got stuck in a blank dialogue box I couldn't exit out of. So after the third time my game crashed as a result of this mod, I thought it was best to leave it alone. What a fantastic waste of money. Aside from the overwhelming amount of glitches, I do like the idea of this one. But even if it worked smoothly, it would never be worth the amount of money it costs. I was expecting a lot more actual content from this, and it really doesn't have enough to offer. So anyway, in terms of free alternatives, there isn't really anything else that I know of that does this specific thing. But the purpose of this mod is to essentially allow you to bypass the limitations of the player carry capacity and merchant gold limits, both of which can be altered using the cheat room mod. Whilst I was editing this, an extra mod was actually added to the store, but fortunately I don't have very much to say about it. It's simply just a mod that adds a couple of houses in Morthal for some NPCs that didn't have them in the vanilla game.
Wow!
Overall, I think these mods are about what I was expecting. None of them are aggressively terrible, they all mostly succeed at what they're trying to be, even if all that is a single armor set. But all of them are flawed in one way or another. And most importantly, none of them are at enough of a level of quality above free mods to make them worth paying actual money for. The two mods that add in dungeons are definitely the best of the bunch, but even then, unless you've played through every free dungeon mod and are truly starved of content, I would stay away. These mods have absolutely no quality control, and if it's all just down to the mod author to maintain a level of quality, how is this different to a free mod? On a side note, if you do play a lot of mods and want to support the creators who make them, you can find that a lot of them have Patreons or YouTube channels where you can make donations. And this way, most of the money would actually go to the creator, instead of just 30%. Anyway, thanks for watching. Due to popular demand, my next mod pack is going to be Bard themed, and I will be posting a new poll alongside this video to vote on what I'll be doing after that.